You're listening to NIL Now, a podcast dedicated to the name, image, and likeness of today's college and high school athletes.
So we're going to explore the crazy and wildly interesting world of name, image, and likeness.
NIL Now, covering the latest sports business headlines and keeping you informed on the nation's top performers. This is NIL Now, where the stars of tomorrow are getting noticed today.
It's the Wild Wild West, but we're wrangling it in.
Presented by Headline Studio and Reddit. Here are your hosts, Lauren Zisler and Kevin Jones.
Hello, my friends. What is going on? Welcome back to another episode of NIL Now, a production of Headline Studio and Reddit, where we cover the crazy and wildly interesting world of name, image, and likeness. We're out wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Subscribe now so you don't miss a beat. Later, we'll speak with Triumph NIL co-founder and partner Brenden Hill, so stick around for that. He's got some good nuggets, some great words of wisdom for us, so we look forward to chatting with him. But first, gotta chat with my buddy, my friend, KJ. KJ, what's up?
I'm trying to see what sauce is coming with them good nuggets that he's going to be. I'm sorry. I couldn't resist.
That was good. You know my love for sauce. With those nugs.
NIL headlines.
We got to reel this in because obviously we got some headlines to get to. Really just one headline today, which is kind of crazy because this has sort of been, I guess, the talk as recent NCAA sanctions have been brought on an NIL issue. And this article coming from Sports Illustrated's Ross Dellinger, and this relates to the Cavinder twins. So obviously some of the most popular NIL athletes out there. And so basically the NCAA handed the University of Miami a year of probation and other small penalties for pushing a meeting between big-time Hurricanes booster John Ruiz and Haley and Hanna Cavinder, who transferred to Miami's women's basketball team last summer from Fresno State. Ruiz has signed over 100 Miami athletes to NIL deals, promoting his company, Life Wallet. Ruiz invited the Cavinder twins and their family over for dinner when they were in the transfer portal on April 13th. Ruiz posted a picture of them all on Twitter afterwards.
The picture.
The
Twitter pic.
I know.
The Twitter pic.
The article says that Miami women's basketball coach Katie Meyer reportedly texted Ruiz that she'd make sure the twins knew who he was, and Ruiz told Meyer he was here to help. Meyer served a school-imposed 3-game suspension for this in the beginning of the season. Ruiz's dinner invitation was seen as a booster recruiting potential players. Meyer got in trouble for facilitating the meeting. Haley and Hanna Cavinder have over 3 million followers on Instagram and are among the biggest names in women's college basketball. As of last summer, Forbes reported the twins have made over $1.7 million in NIL earnings. So
That was a mouthful.
I know.
But that's part of the issue, right? Like, there's so many different nuances right now going back and forth in the NIL space with the rules and the schools having to constantly update their coaches. If you're changing rules like every few weeks or every couple months, now the coaches have to go and get into a team meeting, not even just a team meeting, just like an all-staff coaches meeting with the athletic director and the compliance person, and they're going through all these things so that they know. But I believe sometimes those things get just mishandled, not necessarily always because that's the plan. It's just like, okay, so we cannot talk to boosters, and then we can talk to boosters. The athletic department can't give rules. I mean, they can't hand out, information or point you in a certain direction, but now you can support the collectives. So some of this stuff, I'm not going to sit here and say that Miami is totally innocent. I'm definitely not saying that. I'm just saying that there's a lot going on. There's a lot to think about. And we're in one of these situations here where now you have the coach, she missed 3 games. You got the booster totally involved. Now in the recruiting part of this, they, it's going to miss time. They got to start three or so weeks later, than your normal recruiting dates. So all those like sanctions and stuff like that, it doesn't seem like a big fine, but trust me, it's a huge inconvenience, especially in the recruiting space.
Yeah, and I think there's, like you said, so much to unpack here. There's a lot of confusion, and I think, I'm still trying to unpack a lot of sort of what happened, and, essentially Ruiz is not facing any sort of disassociation at this point. the Cavinder twins aren't facing any sort of repercussions at this point. I think there's just, to me, so many questions, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but what I'm saying is, how this all sort of plays out, just the timing of it. And then I think the big question a lot of people have is, why is this coming down for Miami? Why is this coming down for a women's sport? There's just a lot of confusion as to what spawned this particular incident. And of course, I know we talked about the Twitter pic, right?
They got all the eyes on this. Yeah.
A lot of eyes on it. And, maybe it's a conversational piece that couldn't be ignored. And that's why it was something that was addressed. To me, it is strange because you're not used to seeing boosters and people like that, I guess, tweeting about or I don't want to say bragging, but essentially showcasing that they spent an evening with a particular athlete, right? Or athletes in this case, and their families. That's just kind of unusual and not something we've seen. But maybe in this new NIL world, it wasn't really, there's still some vague things, some gray areas of, is this even breaking the law?
One thing I will say we can give I'm a fierce competitor in my sports days against Miami and Sean Taylor and the whole Hurricanes thing. But to be honest, but from a branding standpoint, I love Miami. Like, that might sound blasphemous from a competitive standpoint, but from the U and the branding and having top-notch athletes, I love that about them. The thing that I will compliment them on in this case is that, the athletic department there got ahead of this and kind of self-suspended, and the coach was suspended from the inside first, so they gave her 3 games. So I don't know if the NCAA knew about it at that time, but when they finally were looking into this, they handed down some more punishment. But they at least acknowledged that, like, this is not right. It's out there. We need to get ahead of it. So I will give them kudos on that.
So the Cavinder twins themselves responded in a tweet saying, "Dear NCAA, scared that female athletes have value?" And so I think that, kind of begs the question. A lot of people have sort of said, you're basically targeting women's sports. And oh, by the way, what are you saying, that this is the only violation that's happened and this is not happening anywhere else with any other sport? And so I think these girls obviously are kind of pushing back a little bit to say, like, why are you gonna come after us when a lot of other things to look at and take into consideration in this process. And then I think the other thing is too, that was in question. And of course, Ruiz talked about this specifically. These 2 girls decided where they wanted to go, that nobody else did it for them. There's probably other layers to this story. And, when these conversations happen, what were conversations behind closed doors? Were there any NIL conversations happening when they were deciding where they were going to go? Was money part of that? But I think there is, maybe some credibility in the fact that these girls had already kind of worked up a lot of these NIL deals prior to this situation and kind of already established themselves as influencers in the NIL space, to where they were kind of standing on their own 2 feet before they even made a decision as to where they were going next.
Oh, yeah. Miami definitely was not the reason that these girls that they have value. First of all, they're just really good basketball players, right? And then they were already, like you said, having deals before they came to the U. But it's also one of the reasons why why the issue lies here is because they are high profile. Like, Miami's a high profile university. These are high profile women athletes. But yeah, I do get some of the comments where they're talking about, this is, a target on women's sports. Like, there's nothing else going on with these, men's basketball, football, baseball, all the other sports that are out there. So I get those comments. But something else I want to kind of say that I hadn't really said yet on the show is, we on the show, I think, we support the NCAA, because we know that this is not an easy task. Can you imagine, like, trying to come up with a rule with all of these colleges and all of these athletic departments with all of these college athletes, trying to figure out one rule that just applies to everybody? I just think that they're definitely having a tough job, a tough go at it, and they're having a switch in leadership. So things aren't going to be perfect, Hopefully shows like ours, where we have an opinion about some of this stuff, hopefully people are listening and can, get that information back to people who are making decisions, just for the pure fact that they can have a difference of opinion or hear a different opinion about the things that are going on. I think that it's valuable information that, they can take back into some of their decision making.
NIL headlines.
Alrighty, and with that conversation, it's now time to bring in our friend, Mr. Bobak to get his personal reaction on the Cavinder twins news, because obviously this is all we're really talking about right now. It's big news. It's striking all the headlines with the infractions that have been passed down. Lots of reaction to it. So first, I'd love to get your reaction, and then we're going to dive into what the Reddit folks are talking about as well. Bobak, good to have you on, as always.
Hey, y'all. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk about it and be a bit of your Sherpa on Reddit for gathering stuff on what's being said. But this story was kind of interesting because you guys have talked about it a lot. You've got these twins that obviously have a very good social media savvy, and they've been able to turn that into some great success between them. But there was this weird hiccup with how they were put in touch with the mega booster Ruiz, and frankly, it sounds, and I'm genuinely believing the folks at the Miami administration, as well as Ruiz himself, really didn't quite realize that the timing was off by a few days, or however many days it was, because I couldn't see him being dumb enough to tweet out that he was meeting with them, knowing that he was going to be flaunting an NCAA rule. There's just no way. He's smarter than that for the most part. And given how confusing the NIL rules are for everyone involved, I'm not shocked at that at all. In fact, the thing that struck me the most was how mild the punishment was, because the players aren't being penalized and Ruiz isn't getting severe punishment. They're not forcing him to disassociate from the program. And Miami, in its history, I believe with Shapiro, man, they have had some real run-ins with boosters going wild and going completely off the rails. So I believe, I think John Ruiz's punishment was there was somebody from the department was going to go and sit down with him and explain the rules over of what he can and cannot do. But even then, they had pointed the twins to him, thinking it was fine, and then he, I think, just assumed that they were right and picked up the ball and ran with it. I think that's my big takeaway is if future punishments are this mild, I mean, it really isn't going to dissuade people from towing the line that much. Even though Miami was put on probation for about a year, even though they have some mild restrictions on the recruitment in women's basketball, and they got to pay $5,000 plus 1% of the women's basketball budget. I think really in the end, this was a slap on the wrist, mostly because of how confusing it is. And I don't think the NCAA can go too far without risking some real pushback that, knowing their luck will end up in the courts and another L for them.
Yeah, man, I think these, the sanctions are, a slap on the wrist. Some of this will be a little bit of inconvenience, especially in the recruiting space. We talk about I think they have 9 recruiting person days in women's basketball during the season. So they got some of that cut back. 3-week probation against recruiting communications. 3 weeks is kind of a big deal. It's basically a month. You have to start a month later than some of the other, the other people that you're competing against. So I think, it's not a hefty from a money standpoint. And to be honest, the money probably wouldn't hurt them if it was a lot more. So I think the smack on the wrist in the recruiting part is probably a little bit more painful, because you got to, as soon as recruiting starts, you got to be out on the road. The coaches are out there, immediately as soon as they can. So I think that is probably hurts them a little bit more than obviously than the money.
Prior to this, I guess, infraction, if you will, you'd see the punishment maybe delegated across the board to Ruiz himself, the twins themselves. None of them are getting any sort of punishment or disassociation. So that's kind of my big question is, where this sort of ruling came from and why was the punishment strictly on the coach and then these other little infractions and fines, but nothing specific to the twins and or Ruiz if they were in fact breaking some sort of rule.
Looking at the post in Our College Basketball, the thing that struck me, one of the comments kind of went to that point. I really enjoyed it. It was by GW310, a North Carolina fan. The NCAA decided to go after 2 of the biggest NIL players and one of the more prominent boosters. but after a strongly worded letter, it's safe to assume, he thinks it's safe to assume NIL will be better regulated in the future. But my thought coming from that comment made by GW310 is I think that's why they were targeted, is they were high profile. It's a high profile program, one that's known for better or worse as being the U for its history and kind of the wackiness they get going on there. And maybe that had something to do with it. And certainly the high profile, as the same user pointed out, that high profile transfer from Fresno State. But at the same time, he points out, they signed a deal with T-Mobile on day one of NIL, way back in the old days of NIL when there weren't collectives, and the sports marketing industry trades pointed to the Twins as examples of how marketers would look at NIL, similar to influencer partnerships. Yeah, I that kind of put it in some perspective, but I do think Miami being Miami, just they are a very darling target for any kind of enforcement that gets everyone's attention, unless you just want to beat up Mizzou again, which the NCAA likes to do.
Across the line, you had them at the house and you put it on Twitter, so that's a bit much. So I think the NCAA had to do something about that.
Well, and that was the part that kind of gave me a little bit of a jolt, was seeing that picture on Twitter, because granted, it's like, okay, we wish you well and, whatever decision you make, but it's kind of like, hey, by the way, I'm with you. I'm hanging out with you. It's kind of putting it out there. Obviously not something we're used to seeing. I would be remiss if I didn't agree with and or take note of the picture itself and the mom's eyes being closed, because I immediately cringed at that myself, thinking, and this comes from Madagas TK on the Reddit site, that her eyes were closed. And yes, like you would think, are we snapping just one picture, multiple pictures? You pick the one where her eyes are closed. If you're the mom, you're obviously looking at it like that, being like, what the heck, man?
Yeah, that comment was real fun, because he was like, if they took a picture with my mom's eyes closed like that, she would forbid me from going to the school.
Bold move. Yeah. I know. So it is interesting to kind of just see the breakdown of sort of what people are talking about. With that being said, just taking this conversation a little bit further, Bobak. So the Redditors, what are some things that you're seeing, and kind of what highlights of them weighing in on how you regulate NIL? So you kind of, let's take a step back and zoom out a little bit even more on how you regulate this thing.
Yeah, you see these kind of conversations pop up periodically, and usually they're spurred by someone who's a little annoyed with the system, the status quo as it is now, which is so moving that it's hard to even call it a status quo. But certainly the concern were just, frustration with seeing all the players moving around, all the money being tossed around, and how to kind of stop it. So there's usually two sides to this argument. There are those who want to regulate it, some more than others, some who want to bring back, remove the one-time transfer rule and make everything go back to how it was before 2006 when the grad transfer thing went into effect. Like, they think that will cause collectives and their backers from tampering too much and will make them think twice. Some people go into that extreme. And then the other side, which I personally tend to go with, are those that just say, don't change it. Let it kind of play itself out. Some go so far as to kind of say an unregulated market will work itself out eventually. That was by our number 8. But some of the others, Rodham Thunder, why would you even want to regulate this? These young athletes dedicated their whole life to their craft. They should be rewarded with whatever the open market commands. And I think that's where you see some of that back and forth, where people are trying to figure out how to control. And I wonder if this is just fans who feel uncomfortable with the new normal, which is rapidly changing. We're seeing things kind of develop on the fly. I kind of sympathize again with RCFB user Netwell5. A lot of you seem to hate that these guys make more money than you. If you try to cap NIL, the Supreme Court will end college athletics as you know it. I don't know if that's true or not, just putting that in there. The current system is basically a compromise, and you're not going backwards on things like transfers either. One last thought, Notre Dame fan Irish Wave had one area that, I don't know if this would probably work, but it's kind of a middle ground, the idea of revenue sharing, where the NCAA or some sort of governing body would tax NIL contributions above a certain amount, something like the athlete keeps the first 100K, then faces increasing, sort of a tax rate or a tithe, if you want to put it that way, as NIL deals get higher, and then those proceeds get split among all the same players on the team. And then athletes would be required to submit tax returns on an annual basis, with the universities reconciling proceeds received to NIL deals reported. Again, they're all coming up with creative ways to do it and please everyone on the program. But I think definitely my own view is it's just fans uncomfortable with how much things are changing at such a rapid pace.
Do you think they're referring to, when you say that, you mean the money that's going around, the types of deals?
Yeah, absolutely. It's money, it's transfers, it's people moving. The 1-2 punch of the portal and then NIL, I think, really has sent a lot of fans, even fairly recent fans. I mean, if you were a fan of college football in the last 10 years, you saw some crazy changes in the last several years. So I think that's what's shaking the foundation for some fans. And some people are rolling with it, but I think others are just kind of trying to reconcile it with, sometimes they're seeing things that happen to their team or players, and they just get frustrated with it because it doesn't seem to comport with perhaps what they view as right or wrong.
I would agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of changes happening fairly rapidly, and then trying to keep the rules up of what's going on, and then changing the rules, like making them tighter and then loosening them and then making them tighter again. I think the back and forth is a little bit, not going to say concerning, but kind of ready for this thing to even out a little bit. I think people criticize, it's like, the rules, are they super clear? You know what I mean? Like, and I don't have specifics right now as I say this, but I do when I think about it. It's like, why is there always so many gray areas? Or is it just everybody's trying to skirt the rules? You know what I'm saying? It's like, it always like, what, you got this case that seems a little, it might be something over here. And then like now, like even with changing it to like having to prove yourself, like you're automatically guilty and having to prove yourself innocent. Like that's a huge change. And I know what it's for is to, try to clean everything up. But something like that is kind of, I feel ridiculous, but it's not up to me. I don't work for the NCAA. I'm just on NIL now. What do I know?
Well, I think this is a great way to end this segment, Kevin.
You're listening to NIL Now.
All right, now we get to have some fun on the show today as we welcome in one of our friends to the show, Brenden Hill, Triumph NIL co-founder and partner. Hill graduated from Virginia Tech in 2007, played football. He started 13 games for the #1 ranked Hokies defense in 2006 as a linebacker. Lunch pail defense. Bring it on, baby. According to Triumph's website, Hill is responsible for guiding the internal and external strategy of the collective and partnering with stakeholders to create sustainable partnerships for the group. Now, the reason I say according to the Triumph's website, that's the official. But with KJ here, his partner in action, what is your official job title for Mr. Brenden Hill?
His official title is my brother. And he's also the bringer honor. Like Brenden is the one, originated this whole idea of Triumph NIL and kind of, talked me into knowing my interests, knowing my background, and then, married with his, he thought it would be a good idea that we get together on this. So Brendan's responsible.
Love it. Well, Brenden, thanks for coming on the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me. And to Kevin's point, I'm just happy that we haven't strangled each other by now, so being brothers and former teammates and doing business together, those are a lot of dynamics, but we're holding it together.
I love it. So Brenden, look, you are a man well-versed in NIL, much like KJ. Of course, I've been nicknamed the Scootback Sisler because in these segments where the friends get on here and start hanging and talking business partners and, some of the legal stuff, I usually defer to KJ because he's a lot more versed in it than me. And so a lot smarter in that department. So the Scootback Sisler is going to scoot back after I ask you this question for a moment. But yeah, what intrigues you and brought you into this NIL space kind of to begin with?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it was to help my university, my alma mater, a place that I love and is dear to me. Obviously the past, anybody who's been following college football, we've had a challenging transition, to say the least, from Hall of Fame coach Frank Beamer to where we are now. So NIL has changed the landscape of recruiting and competitive athletics, especially in sports like football. So first and foremost, I just wanted to try and help our university be competitive in the space for name, image, likeness, and hopefully that translated to wins and victories, and we're optimistic for 2023.
That's a good point, man. Where do you think we are now in the NIL space? What do you think about the landscape of NIL?
It's ever changing. Every day you wake up, there's a new story, there's a new complaint, there's a new direction. And I think, Kevin, you and I have talked about this a lot. I tend to see myself as more of an advocate, and I know you kind of feel the same way, an advocate for name, image, and likeness, because sometimes when people have large platforms and they say things that are misinformed or lack context or are one-sided, the public at large can take that for a fact. And I think it's important for people like you and I, who are involved. And even while you guys are doing the show, I love the show and the podcast. So props to you all for producing this. But these are opportunities for people like myself to kind of give all sides of it and not just make it, not be a Debbie Downer about what name, image, and likeness is.
I got something good for you as we seg into this. Virginia, the state that you all both reside in, that I am from, give it up. Virginia is for lovers. So Virginia could be the next state to pass the high school NIL laws, right? So at the most recent Virginia High School League Executive Committee meeting, a proposal was submitted that would permit NIL for high school athletes if approved by 2/3 vote at the next meeting. The policy would be effective July 1st. At this point, we've got 25 states, including Washington, D.C. now, that allow high school NIL. Brenden, do you have a take on this? What do you think about this legislation if passed?
I think it's awesome. I have a ton of takes on this, ironically, but in our brief time being involved in NIL, and let me just preface this by saying that, I think one of the things that makes our company unique is we try and just be resources, even as people, even outside of Triumph. We try and be resources for student athletes and their families. We have friendships and relationships that don't necessarily benefit Virginia Tech, but we are still connected to those people. And I say all that to say, I was talking to a family, I believe last summer, and they were considering leaving the state of Virginia to go play high school football in another state just because they were going to have the opportunity to benefit from their name, image, and likeness earlier in the process. And I guess if 25 states have approved it, we're right there in the middle. But I would have liked to have seen us be a little more in the front on this. And you see states like Florida and Georgia, those places where, Louisiana, places where SEC football kind of reigns supreme. You see the political influence kind of show up in their name, image, and likeness laws. So I'm glad Virginia's doing it. I would have liked to have seen us be a little more proactive in that space, but ultimately I think it's a win for families and student athletes.
So why are you, you said you're an advocate for it. Why are you such an advocate for it and you really lean into it?
Fundamentally, I think it's a fairness issue. It's an equity issue, right? When you have a 15-year-old or 12-year-old, they can make money on TikTok or go, when they're 16, they can go get a job at McDonald's and earn a living. Essentially what you're saying is I can't be an entrepreneur. I can't benefit off of my God-given name, image, and likeness because I played VHSL football. I think that's mind-blowing to me. So to me, fundamentally, it's a fairness thing to be able to, if my peers, if I'm a high school athlete and my peers can go work, I should be able to benefit. And then you get into things like I've had some conversations about exploitation, right? I talked to one of the Congress women who actually vetoed the bill last year. And her concern was that these athletes were going to be, you hear the bad actor category, right? Everybody throws that out there, bad actors. They were worried that these high school athletes and their families were potentially going to be exploited. And I said, well, let's take a step back and think about if I'm Kevin Jones, right? And I'm the number one player in the state of Virginia and everybody and their mother is showing up.
Which is a fact, by the way, which is a fact.
Everybody and their mother is showing up to my high school game on Friday night and the tickets are sell out in a standing room only, right? Where's my piece of the pie, right? Everybody's here to see me on Friday night, right? They're not here to watch the referees throw flags. They're here to watch me play. So when you talk about exploitation, I think sometimes people only want to see it in a view that is convenient for them. But I think if you take a step back and view it from a broader lens, even just the fact of all these high profile athletes that play high school football and aren't getting any benefit outside of maybe their uniform and their equipment and things like that. But I think you're just seeing everything move earlier in the process. So I'm happy to see it. I think the high school athletes are where the college athletes were a year or two ago. So I love to see that it's progressing.
All right, Brenden, I want to have a little bit of fun with you. I asked KJ this question when he were playing football. What local place or any brand would he want to have an NIL deal with? For you, Brenden, what would that be? What would be the NIL deal of a lifetime for you?
I know the answer for local.
You're going to probably say PKs?
Yeah.
PKs!
Yeah.
He's not going to say that, though. He's not going to say it, but that's what I would say for him.
Well, I was going to say something in the wheelhouse. So I'll give you my context on that. A lot of people see NIL and they see these big, high money deals, right? And I think what we've talked about internally with Triumph is, you want to really just offset cost of living, food, clothing, shelter, right? So if I could have had somebody give me a better car than my 93 Chevy Caprice and help me get gas to put in it, or if someone could have paid my rent and covered my apartment costs, that would have been awesome. So CMG would probably have been a great deal. Shout out to Chase Management Group there in Blacksburg. And, that probably would have been an awesome deal for me.
Look, I like Brendan's approach. You know what KJ said? His local spot was Kabuki.
Oh man, yes,
the jam.
Absolutely.
He knows, though. He knows.
I mean, when you talk about, I haven't been to Kabuki in a long time too. The last time I was in Blacksburg, we were supposed to go, but we didn't make it. But Japanese steakhouse in 2002 was like coming from Newport News, Virginia. You couldn't have told me I wasn't eating like a king every time I got a chance to go there. So yeah, like
the jam.
As you get older and you start seeing a lot more choo-choo trains and things, it waters down. But as a 19-year-old,
the onion choo-choo train,
the onion choo-choo train, and the volcano and all that, all that stuff, man. So as you get older, you get jaded, but when you're 18, 19 and your appetite is out of this world, man, Kabuki. So I props to Kevin on that. He was probably ordering lobster and shrimp too. I bet.
The food's always good, which is so funny you say that, because I was just with my brother and he reminded me to tell you, my brother Alan said he definitely ate dinner with you at one point. He sat next to you and you both got lobster tail, and he remembers that specifically. And this was
as an adult or when I was in undergrad?
When you were an undergrad. So this was like back in the day when he was Pump
the brakes. We don't need no sanctions on the lobster tails.
Well, I think you're out of the what do you call
the
that?
window? I'm out of the window.
You're out of the window. We're not taking any trophies or hardware away from you on this one, okay, buddy? I love it. No, but and Brenden, I love your take on that too, just because I do think that's very kind of wise, because like you said, I think a lot of these athletes do kind of just eye the big prize, right? And I also think the outside world views it as all these athletes, every single team. If you're from a big name team in Alabama, a big SEC team, Virginia Tech, whatever school it is, that, your top paid athletes are making millions of dollars, and then it's funneling down and obviously, trickling down. But, I think after having different, obviously, guests on our show and realizing that there's been opportunities for a lot of people, even at the Division III level. Obviously, it's great to hear what you guys have done with Liz Kitley as well, and her, cooking, kind of the cooking show that she did, or the cooking opportunity, and being able to tie different things and likes and hobbies and interest of these athletes to kind of bring that to the forefront. Because I don't think the immediate payoff, I think that's the one thing. We live in a world of instant gratification where it's like, well, pay me and pay me now. But I think that these deals that you guys are working up, can have long-term impact, right? And just building relationships and showing student athletes how to build relationships, because this can take them further than just that one-time payoff that can really help them to build a portfolio for years to come, even when their respective sport comes to an end.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And one of my favorite projects that we've been involved with is a project that one of our football players and women's soccer players put together, where they're building a community garden and teaching elementary school students about, food insecurity and proper eating habits and growing their own food and that sort of thing. And those are the deals that nobody talks about, but our fan base really rallied around those student athletes to raise money for them to do good. So NIL isn't always about padding your pockets. And I love that, those student athletes have done something great for their community. They're paying it forward to younger folks. And our motto of Ut Prosum, that I may serve, is really an embodiment of Virginia Tech student athletes and people in our community at large. So NIL is not just pay for play. It has some of those elements in some places, just like anything else does. Like, you can use anything for bad, right? But it's all about what you focus on. And I appreciate you guys having me on this show, because I think this is important, what you're doing to kind of shed light on the industry as a whole.
I love that. That's so well said. Maybe you could just leave us with maybe one or two pieces of advice that you would give to the student athletes, maybe advice you're giving to them right now as they're entering into this world and trying to navigate some of this uncertainty that we're all trying to figure out as these new sanctions come down. And obviously we touched on it at the beginning of the show with the Cavinder twins. How can student athletes really navigate this time and really lean into people like you to really make the most of this in a positive way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one thing I say over and over again to every student athlete and every family I meet is keep the main thing, right? NIL doesn't mean anything if you aren't a great person, if you aren't going to class, if you aren't catching the ball, hitting the ball, making the free throws. So keep the main thing. I think sometimes student athletes start thinking too far ahead and they lose track of what they're actually there to do, is be great students and teammates and find themselves like we all did going through college. The other thing I would say, for Virginia, as we talked about, like VHSL and things like that, my message is to the families and the kids: don't use this legislation to try and fleece, I would use the word fleece, collectives and try and negotiate deals and start wheeling dealing. We've talked to coaches even outside of Virginia Tech that, they're not interested in wheeling and dealing right away. They want to get to know these student athletes and make sure that it's a good fit for them outside of NIL. And when NIL becomes a part of the conversation, great. You make sure you have representation, make sure you do your research. But I would say fundamentally, for families and high school athletes, don't go into this thing and just get straight to the money. Like, keep the main thing and focus on where you're going to spend the next, hopefully 4 or 5 years of your life, and where you may end up meeting your spouse, or you're going to make lifelong friends, as me and KJ have been. And I just think it's so much bigger than NIL. NIL is just the next thing on the table. In 10 years, there's going to be something else that's going on in college athletics, and might be TV contracts. Who knows, right? But I think that would be my advice to student athletes and their families: keep the main thing, and don't get too caught up in the money right away.
Good point, bro.
All right, before we let you go, fondest memory of hanging with KJ. Y'all gotta share some insight. Pull the curtains back a little bit. I want to hear about this.
So Kevin left in 2003. And he ended up having an amazing rookie year. And I was best friends with Mike Emo as well. And Kevin and Emo were close as well. And we lived in the same apartment community or what have you. So we played in the Sugar Bowl that next season. And we played Auburn, and we had a unbelievable season, like a magical season, won our first ACC championship. And I forgot how I got looped into it, but somehow Emo was like, "Hey, I'm going down to Miami after the bowl game. You want to go? Kevin's going to be down there." And I was like, "Yeah, heck yeah." So got to go to South Beach. That was my first South Beach experience. probably 20 years old. Kevin had a beautiful hotel right there on Ocean Drive, and we just got to ride mopeds and hang out. And it's coming from Blacksburg and Newport News, Virginia, to seeing South Beach for the first time. That was an amazing experience. So I always remember that. That was a fun time hanging out with Kevin, and we had a good time. So.
How ironic we're talking about Miami again. This NIL conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Awesome stuff, Brenden. We appreciate it. It's just great to hear your insight, your advice. I think there's a lot that, families can take from this, athletes, just anyone listening to this podcast. So certainly good insight there. And of course, you can follow Brenden on Twitter at Brenden Hill and at Triumph NIL for the latest on the Triumph NIL Collective at Virginia Tech. Good stuff there. And of course, you can follow us on the NIL Now show on Instagram and Twitter, Reddit NIL on Reddit. Tell a friend. Let us know what you think about the show. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. A big thank you to Bobak, Kyrie, and the Reddit College football team for their help. You can follow them at Reddit College Football or on Reddit. I'm Lauren Sisler. Kevin, well, he's my co-host, and he's pretty awesome as always. A big thanks to our audio engineer, Colin Schmaling, our associate producer, Dean Zolkowski, and our executive producers, Richard Diamond, Selena Roberts, and Scott Broder. Until next time, peace.
Thanks for listening to NIL Now, presented by Headline Studio and Reddit.